Awesome. So firstly, thank you everyone for joining the session. Hope you've had a good day so far. I'm Paddy Moogan. I'm the co-founder of Aira. We're a digital marketing agency based in Milton Keynes. We actually work with Aptico on their SEO and PPC and things like that. Randomly, Aptico were one of my very first clients when I started doing SEO about 14, 15 years ago now, and PPC as well. So yeah, they're definitely close to my heart as a brand. And yeah, it's great to be here chatting with you all today. Today we are going to focus on digital marketing, and we're going to go through a few different things in terms of the landscape. Firstly, just a couple of admin things. We are recording this session, so you'll get a copy of the video and you'll get some slides, these slides afterwards as well. So don't worry too much about copying things down. By all means, make notes, but you will get a copy of the slides afterwards as a PDF as well. Also, we should have some time for Q&A at the end. So if you do have questions as we go through, feel free to drop, drop them into the chat at the bottom of Zoom, and then we can go through them at the end. We should have a few minutes to go into them. And also at the end of the presentation, I'll share my contact details. So if you do have questions that you'd rather ask directly, that's absolutely fine as well. You can do that via email. So firstly, we're going to kick off with the digital landscape and talk about where we're at right now and where we're going, just to kind of set the tone a little bit for some of the more actionable stuff that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. Cool. So we're going to talk a little bit about the dominant players in digital, and it's kind of hard to talk about this without talking about Google, and we are going to focus a little bit on Google to start off with before moving into more broader areas. And part of the reason for that is because from a search perspective, they have around 86% market share in the UK. That's stayed level for quite a few years now. It kind of goes up and down a little bit here and there, but generally it's in and around the 86% mark. So they clearly are the dominant player when it comes to search and things like that. If you look at mobile search, it actually goes all the way up to 96%. So when it comes to searches that are carried out on a mobile device, Google take around 96% of those. So you can see a much bigger figure. They do dominate on both, but particularly on mobile. And we talk a little bit about what you can do there shortly when we talk about mobile generally. And part of the reason for that, and part of the reason they've actually gotten to where they are, is they generally give the best results. They're not perfect. They sometimes get things wrong, but generally speaking, they provide better results than all of their competitors. One of my favorite examples of this is actually this one, because in my view, this search query that I've typed in shouldn't really work. So I've typed in that movie where they dream within a dream, and Google just knows that I'm looking for Inception. It's so confident I'm looking for Inception that the entire page is dominated by Inception information. You can see here at the top the snippet from Wikipedia, on the right-hand side, images and things like that, snippets from YouTube. They know exactly what I'm looking for, even though I've not used the word Inception. I've not even talked about the actors or the directors or anything like that. They figured out what I'm looking for. And also, interestingly, and this kind of shows where particularly SEO and organic search has been going for many years now. If you click through to a lot of these results, you won't find the phrase, that movie where they dream within a dream, on those pages as one single phrase. You'll see movie and dream and stop words and stuff like that, but they're figuring it out even though this phrase isn't appearing on any of these pages. Now, the same can't be said for Bing. If you type in the exact same keyword here, same phrase, yeah, I mean, they don't get it. They don't know what I'm looking for. They've just given me kind of generic results here about dreams and dream world. So you can kind of get the idea here how much further ahead Google are, even now, compared to their main competitors, and Bing is their main competitor in the UK. They will be challenged at some point. Looking at the bigger picture here, I do think that at some point someone will come along with something a bit different, but it's not going to be anytime soon. The biggest threat to Google at the moment is actually the idea around kind of trust and privacy. They've got multiple lawsuits, multiple cases, particularly in the EU, that they're working on at the moment around trust and privacy. So there is the possibility at some point that may trip them up a little bit, or they may get broken up a bit more. There could be something that happens there, but generally they're not going to get challenged anytime soon from a search perspective. So when it comes to marketing, they are still really important to be thinking about and really important to be looking at as a viable channel, whether that's organic or paid, which we'll talk about a little bit later. In the meantime though, advertising, Google Ads, display advertising, it's still their core revenue model. So it still accounts for about 97% of their revenue comes from advertising. and they're a publicly traded company. They've got shareholders. They've got a duty to grow shareholder value. So that's going to continue to be their core revenue driver for a long time to come. And it means they have to keep getting more and more from that model that they're using, which ultimately means getting more people to advertise and driving up the cost of ads as well, which is obviously important for us to know if we are using that as a channel. Second big area outside of Google, more broadly around mobile search. And Google is a big player here, as we said, 96% market share. But it's kind of this running joke now in digital that it's been the year of the mobile for about 15 years or so. And I think we've kind of slightly past it. I think it is a year or two ago actually was the year of the mobile, but essentially it's here now. It's kind of amongst us. It's not the year of the mobile anymore. It's just a constant thing that's always important. And I think for a long time it was coming, but now it's at the point where if you're not taking mobile experience and mobile search and advertising seriously, you are going to get left behind. And that means that we need a mobile first mentality when it comes to our websites, to our campaigns, to the experiences we give to our users, whether that's via apps or via a website or a little bit of both. We do need a mobile first mentality. And it's actually the mentality that Google have got. And they actually rolled out this feature a couple of weeks ago, which is infinite scroll on mobile search results. So rather than having to click page 2 or page 3 at the bottom of the results, you just keep scrolling and then the results, as you can see here, just populate automatically. The reason I'm sharing this is because Google tend to roll out these kinds of features on mobile before they roll them out on desktop. And they've been very open and transparent about the fact that as a company, they think of mobile first. They think of this as the first point of call when it comes to features, functionality, design, that kind of stuff. So from our perspective, we have to kind of fall in line with that and think mobile first as well. Generally as well, Google for a couple of years now look at your website's mobile first. So when they crawl your website, when they come to it and try and figure out what it's about and figure out how good you are, they will render the page and render the whole website as if it were mobile website first rather than desktop. And that's really important because it can be the case sometimes that you may offer a slightly different experience on desktop versus mobile. So for example, you may actually reduce the text on the page on mobile to keep it more succinct and not too long. You may reduce the number of links in your navigation because again, you're trying to keep it succinct. That's really important to be aware of though, because Google will be looking at the mobile version primarily. So if you've got great content that's actually hidden on mobile and can only be seen on desktop, that may actually mean that Google don't see it or they find it harder to find, because I look at most sites mobile first now. So just worth keeping that in mind because this is very real in terms of this mentality that they've got and the consequences for us as marketers. They also care so much about speed. This has been the case for many years now, and they've been very open about website speed being a factor in their search results. And that continues. They want to make the web faster. They want a really good experience for their users. They don't want people landing on a site waiting 3 or 4 seconds for something to load. We all know, we've all been there. You're going to click back and go somewhere else. And Google really do care about speed. And that's going to continue to be really important as well. Thirdly, voice search. I want to quickly touch upon this because it is another big area that we're thinking about a lot at the moment at Aira. A lot of our clients are asking us about this area. So I want to quickly touch upon it a little bit as well. So the first thing to say here is obviously speakers. Voice search can mean a number of things. So things like Alexa, Google Home, it can be searching on your mobile device when you do a voice search on there and that kind of stuff as well. It can also be Siri. There's all sorts of different ways that voice search can actually be activated. And also there is a key difference between voice search when you're looking for information that's quite general and voice search in terms of asking a question. So if you're asking Alexa, what's the time? That kind of stuff, that's a little bit different to actually doing a search looking for general information or looking for questions, answers, and that kind of stuff that's not too specific. So it's worth just keeping that in mind. And because of that, statistics are actually a little bit messy. When you go out there looking for stats on voice search, I did it for this presentation, they're all over the place because I think at the moment it's still a relatively new area. So firstly, there's not a lot of consistency. There's not a lot of sharing from Google or Amazon or anyone like that in terms of what goes on behind the scenes. So at the moment, there's not a whole lot of data for us to really grab hold of and use to inform our decisions. But we do know that smart speaker sales are growing, both Alexa and Google. We know that's happening all the time. It's actually one of Amazon's most popular products. And also we do know that children are using smart speakers more and more now, again, whether that's on mobile or tablet devices or Alexas, that kind of stuff. Children are actually getting used to the idea that smart speakers are very normal. They're part of their experience, and they're getting used to talking to this random speaker in the corner of the room and getting information back, and it kind of just being there for them. So that's something to bear in mind for the future, and obviously the next generation coming through. This will be a lot normal than the likes of myself, where this is still quite new and shiny. But generally, in terms of voice search, I have to say, I think the jury's still out a little bit in terms of what it means for people like us, for brands, for websites, for businesses. There's a few businesses that are kind of moving towards it and trying to capitalize on it, and there are definitely ways that you can use voice search that are relevant to businesses. So for example, ordering products, that kind of things, playing games, competitions. I've seen a lot of stuff that businesses have set up, but I think generally there's a lot of question marks over what voice search actually means for a business in terms of bottom line revenue growth and business outcomes. And part of the reason for that is I think Google, Amazon and Apple haven't really figured this out for themselves yet. I think they're still trying to see, okay, what's the opportunity here? Because remember, ultimately for them, it's about user experience, but also how do they drive revenue? How do they turn voice search into a business model that drives shareholder value? And I'm still not sure they've all figured that out just yet. Particularly Google, if you think about doing a voice search on a mobile device, monetizing that in the same way they do for desktop or mobile searches is obviously a lot more difficult. And I don't think they're there yet in terms of figuring that out. And until they figured that out, it's hard for us to know how we kind of plug into that and how we get the most from voice search. Because obviously these three companies control a lot of the devices. They're going to push things down certain routes. So again, the jury's still out a little bit for me in terms of what it actually means for brands, but it's definitely an interesting area to be watching and keep an eye on. But I don't think, the one thing I do think, and I would kind of say quite clearly, is it's definitely something that you need to be watching for and seeing what they do and testing things and actually seeing what works for you. But also, it's not going to change things overnight. It's not going to suddenly come along and tear apart your businesses or anything like that. So to some extent, we can just wait and see what happens with this. One thing we can see though, and again, these are the things we need to be watching out for, is Google are trying to improve voice search by actually using desktop and mobile searches. So this kind of result here, I'll search for how do you grow chilies at home, and I've got a few bullet points here that I can go through and I can click through to the full results. Now, you will probably have seen these growing a lot in search results that you've done yourselves, where you ask a question and rather than having a set of 10 results, you get snippets of the answers. This is very deliberate from Google. They're trying, in my opinion, to train and refine questions and answers on desktop and mobile so they can then use that for their voice devices. So for example, if people are engaging with this particular result in front of us, how do you grow chilies at home? If you then ask your Google Home the same question, they can use this kind of information because they know that it works on the web to actually answer the question for you. So rather than seeing the result in front of you, they may read out these 4 steps here and the rest of them as well. So you can see snippets of them doing this. Likewise, you've probably seen the growth of the people also ask section with lots more questions, lots more answers. They're measuring people's engagement with these. They're trying to see, are they good? Are they bad? Are they useful? In my opinion, they're using all of this to try and train voice search results and trying to see, okay, what should we give someone on a voice device by using the masses of data they've got from desktop and mobile. So moving towards the future and kind of keeping all of that in mind, but thinking about, okay, what does this mean for brands? I'm going to go a bit more generic now, so away from Google, away from any particular platforms or devices, and actually think about strategically, what should we be thinking about as brands and as businesses when it comes to digital marketing? So in our view, and we've kind of started to go all in on this as an agency as well, digital is becoming less and less about tactical execution. I'm going to talk through what we mean by that. So what we don't mean is we should not worry about building great websites or delivering great campaigns, that kind of stuff. Those things are still and will continue to be absolutely crucial. But what we mean by that is it only gets you a seat at the table. So having the best website, having a great creative marketing campaign, yes, it will be good for your business, but it will only get you a seat at the table. In years gone by, that may have been enough to actually win and to grow your business at a faster rate than your competitors. But I think more and more in years to come, that will become very, very standard and expected of most brands, and it'll be much harder to stand out if that's all that you focus on. So it won't mean that you'll win. It'll mean you get a seat at the table, and that'll be it for the time being. And part of the reason for that is because we are seeing things like machine learning, artificial intelligence, marketing automation play much bigger roles in the marketing landscape. And these are things that we can control to some extent, but to a greater extent, particularly in years to come, The machines are going to do a lot of the work here rather than the human being, rather than the human brain. And we need to take that into account and think about what that means for us. It has played a part in paid media. So Google search results in particular have been influenced by machine learning and artificial intelligence for a couple of years now. So for example, they are using technology to try and match your search results and the keywords you're targeting with people who are actually in the right mindset to be buying your product at any particular time. They're trying to take the data they've got about people and combine it with your targeting with keywords and advertising and actually put the right customers in front of you at the right time. And they're doing that through machine learning technology. And it's important to try and understand that and to embrace that, because it's only going to get bigger, but it has been the case for a couple of years now in paid media. And we are starting to see glimpses of it in organic search as well, again, particularly with Google, who are more advanced than most on this. So one of the ways we know this is because Googlers, people who work there, people who work in Google search, can't always tell you why a certain website ranks where it does. And the reason for that is because the machines are doing the work here. It's not a bunch of levers that they can pull or they can go and look at and say, well, actually, this one's here, this is roughly why. In years gone by, they could do that to some extent. Now the machines are taking over and they don't always know why something ranks the way it does. And that kind of shows the way the organic search is going as well. So delivering best practice SEO or paid media or any form of marketing, yes, it is absolutely important, but it is just table stakes. It's just going to get you into the game. It doesn't mean you're going to win. So how do we get ahead and actually win? That's the main question. And for us, it comes down to these three pillars. This is something we're pushing quite hard across our teams at the moment. So you need a combination of these three things. So firstly, you need a multi-channel strategy. So being too reliant upon one single channel, one single way of getting traffic and revenue, it's not sustainable. It should be something that's more split evenly across multiple channels so that you're not too reliant upon one, and that you're using as many channels as possible to drive revenue and drive business for your company. Secondly, it's really important to have a high degree of commercial awareness across your marketing team. So we need to take marketing teams away from day-to-day metrics that are important. So things like keyword rankings, click-through rates, cost per clicks, that kind of stuff. Those are important, but they need to move more towards, well, what's the revenue this is driving? How many leads are we getting? How many customers are we getting as a result of this activity? So they're not just thinking about kind of the first steps in the process when it comes to marketing, they're thinking about the end goal as well, and also knowing what the drivers of profit for your business, what the drivers of growth. They need to be thinking about those as well as the general day-to-day metrics. And thirdly, as I mentioned earlier, execution day-to-day is still really important. And we want to be pushing our marketing teams to be the best they possibly can be at their particular discipline. So if you've got an in-house SEO team or a couple of SEO managers, pushing them to be the absolute best in-house SEO team that they can be is going to be the way that you get the basics perfect, but also push on beyond your competitors. So the combination of these three things are where we think things are going. And we're going to talk about that in a bit more detail now as well, and talk about making it actionable. So when it comes to the multi-channel strategy, all channels need to focus on the same business outcomes and the customer journey. And I'm going to talk about the customer journey a little bit later as well. And something that we see quite a lot when we ask clients about cross-channel integration, and we say, well, how are you doing that? How are you making sure that your SEO team talks to your email team and your copywriting team? How do you make sure that happens? The answer is normally the same, which is, well, we share data, we share reports, we share insights. And again, that's table stakes. That should be happening automatically. It isn't enough to really push ahead. We need to be sharing more than that. And each channel should be sharing and focusing on one single unified customer journey. The one journey, again, can be multiple ways it can happen, but they should all focus on this customer journey that works for your business. And they should be knowing what the business outcomes are of that customer journey. What's the end goal here that we're all aiming for? What's the one thing that brings us together? Because regardless of what channel you're working on, having a single unified, very, very clear customer journey and the outcomes that should lead to, should be the North Star for all of your marketing teams, no matter what channel they work towards. If you work with agencies as well as an in-house team, they should both be aligned to this North Star of a customer journey that you all understand and know, and the outcomes that you're looking for. And this is exactly why commercial awareness is key, because if you don't think too much about the business outcomes here, you may end up with an agency or a team that just worry about, well, I'm going to get traffic to the website. It's someone else's job to make sure it converts. And that is something that's been said many times in years gone by. It's not going to be enough moving forward. We need to go from the click through to conversion and make sure that our teams are accountable for that whole journey, even if they can, and make sure they influence their particular parts of that journey. And that means optimizing for those business outcomes. So of course, clicks, impressions, click-through rate, keyword rankings, leads, those things are very important, but what's it mean for the business? We have to optimize for those and keep those front of mind, and then everything else will follow. Everything else kicks down from knowing what drives profit, what drives growth, what drives our revenue. Everything else should follow from those areas. Also on this note, brands that can't execute quickly are going to get left behind. And we work with a range of clients, right from small funded startups right through to multinationals. And they all have pros and cons, but typically the larger companies do tend to struggle when it comes to execution. So don't be that brand that has to go through 5 layers of approvals to get something done. They're the brands that are going to be left behind if they can't execute quickly, because if they can't execute quickly, then their competitors definitely will. So let's go a bit more tactical. We're going to talk about some of the digital channels now. So we've kind of talked a bit about the mindset here of business outcomes, customer journey. We're going to talk a little bit about the digital channels that are available to you and some of the pros and cons that are available with each one as well. So this is where I started years ago about TICO, SEO. So just so we're clear, SEO is the section in green here. So below the page results, you tend to see the organic results start to kick in here. Now, for some, like I mentioned earlier, you might get a little snippet of text and a link. Others, you might just get straight links, but this is where the organic results start. Technically, they're free to appear on. You don't have to pay to be there. Google just have to be able to crawl your website and see what you're about, but it does require investment and time, particularly if you are in a competitive or even moderately competitive industry. You are going to need to proactively think about your website, the experience you offer, the content you create, the way you build your brand. All of these things need to be taken into account because they all factor in to what Google look at. And there are lots and lots of signals that you can influence. Google used to say there's about 200 or so. There's actually many more than that because there's kind of variations of all of them. So there's likely to be thousands of signals that they look at in order to determine who should be on page 1 of Google, who should be number 1. Now, it's not necessarily useful to try and pick every single signal apart and optimizing for each one, partly because we don't know what they all are. We will never know what they all are. It's a bit like Coca-Cola giving away their recipe. Google just don't tell us every part of their algorithm. But we should know the drivers that create a great user experience for our users. Those are one of the key things that we need to look at when it comes to Google search results. And one way we do think about this in terms of breaking down those signals is this, what we call the SEO pyramid. So the base of the pyramid is what we call on-page and technical optimization. So these are signals around things like how quick is your website, how responsive is it on mobile devices, how clean is the code for Google to understand, how good are the on-page signals such as page titles, internal links, metadata, that kind of stuff. These kind of form the basis of the pyramid. Excuse me. Second layer up is content. So this is actually the content that lives on your website, whether that's on your categories, your product or service pages, your blog, FAQs, that kind of stuff. What's the stuff that users actually read and engage with? That makes up the second layer. And the top layer here is what we call off-page optimizations. This is things like links to your website from other websites, maybe from news articles or newspapers or blogs, that kind of stuff. Could be brand mentions when you do advertising and things like that. Social media, all sorts of things that happen off your website that allow Google to see who you are and how big you are as well. Now, this is a pyramid for a reason, because you can do the off-page optimization, you can write great content, but if you don't have the basics covered at the base, so if you have a slow, clunky website, if users can't find their way around it, if they don't really know what it's about, then off-page and content isn't going to be as effective as it could be. So this is why we think about it as a pyramid. Moving on to paid search. So paid search is the area in green at the top. So the 4 ads at the top here on the left. And also because I've Googled coffee beans, which is an e-commerce related keyword, I've also got the shopping adverts on the left-hand side as well. So there's quite a few ads on this page. And this is going to get bigger and bigger. Again, Google have got to drive more revenue for their company and their shareholders. So you are seeing these grow and become more subtle as years go by. They are pay to play. So in order to be you do have to put money into it, and it does require a cash investment to do that. However, it can lead to instant traffic. So it's not quite as simple as just put money in, get traffic out, and that traffic then converts. There's a lot more to it than that. But essentially, at a very, very basic level, you can appear in these results very, very quickly by putting money into it. The amount of money depends on how competitive the particular industry is. So some industries will be more competitive than others. So for example, things like gambling, poker are amongst some of the most expensive keywords. Then you've got things like car insurance, high value product services. People will pay a lot of money to get people on board where the lifetime value is very high. Then you've got other smaller stuff as well. So the cash that you need depends on how competitive your industry is. But Google do make it very, very spend money. So to set up a Google Ads account, it's super easy. It's almost too easy, to be honest, to go in and do it. Now, you can kind of give Google a hard time for this because obviously they're out to make money, but also they do want to make it easy for you to get going. But it is worth making sure you spend time on it and don't just plug your credit card in and do exactly what they say. So get an expert, get an agency, get a freelancer, get someone in your team to learn about it. Make sure you've got someone with oversight and don't leave all of it to Google if you're just starting out. But machine learning, as I mentioned earlier, is playing a big part in targeting. So in terms of targeting users at the right time, this is growing a lot at the moment, and we are giving power to Google here and trusting them to actually do the right thing. So there is a balance here between embracing machine learning and the features Google are giving us against making sure it works for our company. So at Aira, we are embracing it, but we are keeping a very close eye on what Google are doing, so that if something isn't working for a particular client, we scale it back and go the old-fashioned route and do it ourselves. Related to that, display advertising. So moving out of paid search and towards display ads. So this is an example on the New York Times. So you've got this article here, and above the article and scattered throughout are display adverts. Now, creative, as you can imagine, is a lot more important here because you're trying to capture people's attention. You're trying to bring people to a website when they may not actually be thinking about your website. So here, if I'm reading about the Apple iPhone, I may not necessarily want to click on an advert through to someone else. However, on the plus side, it's generally cheaper than paid search. So you tend to pay a lot less to get traffic through display advertising, but it can be far less targeted. So as I mentioned with this result here, I might not be in the right mindset or the right kind of targeted customer to actually click on this advert. I might just scroll straight past it and read the article. So it can be cheaper, but it is a little bit more difficult to target people. But one way you can improve that is by using retargeting methods. So retargeting is when you visited a website in the past and then you get adverts for that same website on other sites across the web. I'm sure you've all had it on Amazon. Are quite bad for this, where they will target you for an advert where you've already bought the product. So that, those really annoying ones that we all get, that's retargeting. So it can go badly if you don't target it correctly and you go too big on it. But if you get it right, it can be a really effective way of making those display adverts more relevant, more targeted, and really targeting messaging as well. So for example, if someone visits a certain product page on your website, you can then retarget them with messaging and creative for that specific product. So you're not giving them a generic advert and trying to pull them back generically. You can give them very customized messaging as well. So retargeting can be very powerful, but you have to put the time into it to get it right and make sure that you're targeting the right people at the right time. And also that you're not annoying people with those ads that follow you across the web and you end up getting annoyed by them. Paid social. So here we're talking a little bit about LinkedIn, Facebook ads, that kind of stuff. So there's a few ways of doing it. I'm going to talk about LinkedIn a little bit because I know many of you will work in B2B and LinkedIn can work very well for that. So you may see adverts like this from WeWork in your feed on LinkedIn that is a promoted advert. You may get links on the right-hand side as well, which are more kind of display adverts. These can work quite well generally. And I used to be quite skeptical of paid social, but it can work really well if you put the time into it as well. And LinkedIn in particular, it can be very expensive. We tend to advise clients having a lot of budget set aside if they are going to do LinkedIn, but it can work really well if you've got really good content that you can use for content offers. So things like white papers, downloadable product guides, case studies, webinars, that kind of stuff. If you do that kind of stuff as part of your marketing, LinkedIn can be very good for generating leads through offering that content to people. So that's worth bearing in mind. It's less good for just general display advertising, but for content-led lead generation in B2B, LinkedIn can be very effective for that, even if it is expensive. Having said that, Facebook is also really good for granular targeting, a little bit less than it used to be about a week ago. So just this week, Facebook actually dialed back a bunch of their targeting for specific demographics and attributes, but it is still very powerful in terms of targeting specific people with certain interests or certain buyer cycles and things like that, or certain attributes. But it can work across B2B and B2C. It is kind of a common misconception that Facebook's only good for B2C, but actually with the right B2B message, it can also work really well there as well. And it is much better LinkedIn for granular targeting, even if it has been dialed down a little bit because of trust and privacy issues. And leading on from there, organic social. So organic social is generally quite passive and visibility is very low these days. And that's partly because Facebook and LinkedIn, obviously they want you to be clicking on ads. They want to drive that revenue. So organic social posts tend to get a lot less attention and visibility. So it can be quite a challenge. But to get the most from it, if you have a sizable engaged audience on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever it is, then you can get value from it. Now, bear with me for a second. This is actually one of my favorite tweets of all time, but it's designed to demonstrate a point. So this was about 10 years ago now from Lady Gaga. 5 words, saying never be afraid to dream. Bear with me for a second. 5 words, got 52,000 retweets, 18,000 favorites. As a marketer who wants to drive brand awareness for my clients, here's the kind of numbers and time investment that you dream of, literally, where you think, okay, what can I put in and get the most attention from? But remember, she's got tens of millions of followers. She's got a massive audience. Even at this point in time, she had loads and loads of followers and a massive audience. My old boss, however, in my previous role, did exactly the same, didn't get quite the same level of engagement, right? It's exactly the same content, same tweet. If you don't have that audience, you don't have that engagement, it won't work as well as if you do have that audience. So organic social can work very well, but you need that audience, you need them engaged, you need them following you very, very closely and providing value for them. Having said all of that as well, it is a default option now for customer service, particularly in B2C. So people will expect you to have a Facebook Messenger account that is responsive. People may expect to be able to DM you on Twitter. So it's worth bearing in mind, even if only for a customer service perspective, to keep an eye on it and make sure that people are engaging on those channels, that they can actually find you and reach you. But cool. So email marketing, in my view, one of the most underrated channels, and I think part of the reason for that is it's one of the oldest, right? It's one of the originals from when the internet first started, so it's not quite as shiny or as new as some of the social channels, but it's still one of the best and most underrated in my view. And part of that is because you've got an engaged audience who should have opted into your emails and they want to hear from you. We should be making more of that. But it can be hard to stand out because we all get bombarded with emails every single day. But when you get it right, it can lead to a very strong engaged audience if you're giving that audience value. Some of our clients will be able to send out emails and just know they'll get a bump in sales or a bump in leads or a bump in traffic to their website because that audience is very engaged. It takes time, you have to work hard at it, but when you've got it right, it's almost a guaranteed way of getting engagement from your customers. Finally, just to quickly mention direct traffic. So this is what happens when when users type in your name into Google Chrome or Safari directly, so aptico.com. If I type in aptico.com and come directly to the website, that's a class of direct traffic. So this is heavily influenced by offline or brand advertising and above the line stuff. So if you are doing a lot of that, you may see spikes in your direct traffic in Google Analytics. But I just wanted to quickly mention that it's also how Google Analytics labels unknown traffic sources. So essentially, if they don't know where someone's come from for a tracking reason or because it's hidden, they will label that traffic as direct. So just a quick heads up that if you are doing anything above the line there and you see spikes in traffic, it may well be because of your work, but also it is a default option if Google just don't know where someone's come from. Right, so last couple of minutes, we're going to talk about how to make things actionable and where to focus. So we've got the context, we've got the landscape, we've got the mindset, we've got the channels that we can focus on. Now I want to talk a little bit about how to actually action things. And the way that we recommend actioning things across all of our clients is really focusing on that customer journey that I mentioned earlier. So whatever activity, that's where it all starts. And again, it's where all of our channels, all of our teams have to really focus their time and energy. Now, we tend to think of it like this, and we still do this to some extent to Aira, but historically, you've tended to find these kind of stages where you've got awareness when someone's starting off that journey thinking, I've got a problem, I've got a need, I need to get some kind of service for something or product, and they're starting to investigate their options and researching things. You then got consideration where they're a bit further along, they know what they may need and starting to consider options. And then finally, decision where they go off and make a decision and either pick up the phone, drop you an email, pick their credit card, whatever it is, they decided what they want. That's how most models have tended to work up until now. However, the customer journey isn't this linear, right? It's a lot more complex. So for example, you may view an ad on LinkedIn, then the same day you may go off and search for that brand and click in Google. You can then go to Instagram, YouTube, you can see a PR campaign. There's all these different steps that someone can follow over, in this case, nearly 100 days before coming to your website and actually booking a demo or getting in touch or getting a credit card out. This customer journey is getting more and more complex, and it isn't as simple as awareness, consideration and decision. And we need to keep that in mind. And Google have started to talk a lot about this recently, and they're calling it the messy middle. It looks something like this, where someone starts out with some kind of a trigger. So this is kind of the equivalent of the awareness stage, where they know they need something, but they're not quite sure what it is. And then they start to explore, they start to look at their options, they may evaluate their options, but actually at that point, a lot of people go backwards. They don't necessarily move in that linear fashion. They may go back, do more research, particularly with complex products. And many of you, as I mentioned, work in B2B, you may have very long sales processes. It's not going to be the case they just follow those 3 steps and get in touch with you and want to sign up to your product. So we have to actually keep this in mind, that it's not a linear journey. So our job here is to find those touch points along that journey. So not worrying about people following a set process, but just knowing what are the touch points where we can actually get in touch with those people, where we can put our brand in front of them, where we can put our product in front of them that we can actually leverage. Now, there's a bunch of ways we can figure this out. I could talk for a whole day just on these ways alone. And I'm going to give you just one example that we can use, that we have used at Aira. So there's a lot going on here. So again, bear with me and you will get a copy of this afterwards. So this is a B2B focus in terms of helping clients, helping our teams understand what kind of activity, what kind of channel, what kind of focus should I have based on what my needs are at any given point in time. So each of the rows is a particular kind of activity that you may do across SEO, PR, PPC, brand, that kind of stuff. And across the x-axis is essentially what you need. So if you are actually saying, look, I need as much money, I need as much revenue right now as possible, there aren't that many genuinely good marketing initiatives and activities that are going to do that instantly for you. But if you need money quite fast, then the first thing that we look at is, well, okay, PPC. That money in, give cash to Google, start getting that visibility, start getting that traffic, and start trying to convert it. If you're looking for that really quick hit, PPC is a great way to do that. But as you move further along this process, so if you're looking at longer term investments, longer term strategies, that's where SEO starts to come in, because SEO is very effective, but just take time, as we mentioned earlier. Same with PR, digital PR, lead generation, nurturing. You can see how this moves along this process. So one way you can figure out, where should I focus, where should I put my marketing budget? So we're focusing on your needs. Can you afford to wait 2 years? Is it the kind of product cycle that does take that long to kick in? Do you need something sooner? Are you coming up to an investment round, or are you trying to raise funding next year? Those kind of considerations need to come into place here, because that will help determine what kind of channels, what kind of activity you should actually focus on. So again, it's just one way of thinking about this that we tend to use at Aira. Again, I can talk about other ones. Feel free to drop me a message if you want to talk about one for yours. So start wrapping up, last couple of minutes. We should have a minute or two for questions as well. So as I mentioned right back at the start, push beyond that best practice. That is essential, but it's not going to get us to the point of winning and growing as quickly as we could be. Choose channels based on that customer journey, manage the customer journey and the touch points, your central focus for all of your teams, all of your channels, and build the channels backwards from there. Try not to fall into the trap of saying, oh, I need to do PPC, or I need to do digital PR, or I need to do a brand awareness campaign. Think about the customer journey first, and then work back from there to choose the right channels for you, because in some cases those channels may not be the best ones or the most efficient ones for you to invest into. And finally, optimize the business outcomes. So again, key day-to-day metrics are really important to keep an eye on, those kind of lead measures of what you're doing, but don't forget about, and don't let your teams forget about the end goal here. So don't let them focus on just keyword rankings or traffic. Get them to also think about revenue, leads, inquiries, whatever it is that's important to your business that drive profit and growth. Get them to focus on those. So we're going to wrap up in a few minutes. So when we're done, feel free to go back to the Aptico Live dashboard for details on the rest of the day's agenda. And this is my contact details. So paddy@aira.net if you do want to ask me any questions directly afterwards. Aira.net's our website. You want to get in touch there as well. If you're on Twitter, I'm at Paddy Moogan as well. So feel free to tweet me, send me a message on there as well if you do have any questions. So thank you for joining me. It's been really great to chat to you all. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, grab a quick drink, and then if you do have questions, please drop them into the chat at the bottom of the screen. I can go through them, and then if not, we can start to wrap up.